In 1981, Gary La Fontaine published a book simply called Caddisflies. And up until this book, there really hadn't been a lot written about the caddis. Paul Needham did a fair amount of research on what trout eat in his 1938 book, Trout Streams. And you can find used copies of that book out there, mostly later editions, but they're pretty reasonably priced. Then Larry Solomon and Eric Leiser published The Caddis and the Angler in 1977. But La Fontaine's book, which has been out of print for several years, many people consider this to be the Bible on the caddisfly, and it really is a masterpiece. Now, I'm not reviewing this book today, but I plan to soon. It's just pretty expensive right now, and I can't afford an extra copy of it to give away. If you're lucky, you'll find a used copy of it out there for about $80. But I was fortunate that one of the gentlemen in my TU chapter was giving away some of his old books, and one of them was Gary La Fontaine's Caddisflies. So thank you, Alan, for this wonderful book, and thank you, Bob, for sending it to me. This book now has a prominent place on my shelf, and it's literally going to take me years to get through all the great information in it. So about this first fly I'm going to tie, it's not an unknown fly. You'll see plenty of references to it out there, but as far as caddis dry flies go, it is probably one of the lesser fished ones. I'm talking about the Delta Wing Caddis, and most of the versions you'll see out there, Barry Orr Clark has one, Harry Murray sells his version. Well, they're tied with like a regular elk hair caddis with the hair kind of split to give it that delta and kind of a spent wing look. And one interesting note, and La Fontaine does talk about this in the book, is that you don't see a lot of caddis patterns tied spent. You'll see plenty of mayfly spinners out there, but why not the caddis? I mean, they do lay their eggs in the water, and plenty of them die and fall in and float down the river. So this Delta Wing Caddis, it's kind of a caddis version of a spent wing mayfly. Now the La Fontaine version I'm tying, which was originally created by Larry Solomon, isn't tied by splitting the elk hair or deer hair wing. He uses feather tips for the wing. And he doesn't use a lot of hackle. So as tied, I've got to think this thing is not going to be a high floater. Both the wing and the body are probably going to sit down there in the surface film. Now I fish caddis dry flies all the time, but I've got to admit I've never fished this pattern. But I did tie half a dozen of them, filled up a row in my box, so I'm going to remedy that this year. And I'd even say that this version is a little bit easier to tie than the regular elk hair or deer hair caddis. So there it is in the vise, Gary La Fontaine's Delta Wing Caddis, as originally tied by Larry Solomon. Now I'm tying this on a size 16, standard length barbless dry fly hook, and I am going to use tan thread. You could certainly use black, but when I'm tying caddis dry flies, I typically try to stick with the thread color of the body color I'm going to use. Now after you get your thread caught in, let's put a little wax on it. It's not going to take much because this mink I'm using it's pretty easy to dub. And this is just a natural, so it's kind of a tannish dun color. Now this size 16 is not going to take too much of a noodle. This is maybe an inch on here. So let's take a couple of wraps until we have some dubbing being laid down. Now we'll try to tighten it up a little bit and get a taper if you can, but caddis bodies are generally pretty thin, so I wouldn't worry too much about this right here. Now La Fontaine did say use gray hen tips for the wings, and you know, certainly do that if you've got small enough hen feathers, but sometimes they'll be too big. So these are from a rooster, and they're going to be just fine. I did tie a couple with hen, and they looked fine too, but they were getting a little bit fat on me. So I'm going to catch them in both at the same time, kind of loose wrap so I can get this little delta split here, the delta wing part of this fly, before I really lock them in. Now they're going to be a little bit longer. That might be, you know, splayed out a little bit more than I want. So let's see if I can back that off just a little. Let's see. Okay, I think that's going to be okay right there. I'm going to spin my thread clockwise, cord it up just a little bit. Oops, I spun that around. Yeah, we'll be fine. Okay, now let's snip this excess up here. And just catch in a brown collar hackle, dry fly hackle up here. you know, a little bit longer than a hook gap maybe. Now we're not going to heavily hackle this. 3 or 4 wraps should be fine. This is what's going to pretty much keep it floating, but at the same time it's not going to be a real high floater. So I think that was 3. I'm not going to try to go 4. One I tied a minute ago, I did get 4 wraps, I think, but I would probably be crowding my eye and in danger of closing off it if I went with 4 wraps on this one. So I think 3 is going to be sufficient. We'll see how it looks. I think that's going to be just fine. There's a fish's view right there, and that's enough hackle to keep it on the surface. So a little bit of cleanup right there and drop a head cement, and this guy's good to go. So that's it, my friends. I appreciate you watching. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.